My father wasn't a talkative man. He was practical, private, and thoughtful, someone who kept his feelings to himself. Growing up, I never heard long speeches about life or deep emotional reflections. That just wasn't his way. But when doctors told him he had 6 months to live, everything changed. Suddenly, the man who had always kept his heart guarded began to speak openly about the things that truly mattered to him. He shared words I'd never heard from him before, words I wish I'd heard 20 years earlier. Welcome to the UnRetired, where you're not done, but you're finally doing what you want. This channel is all about rethinking and reshaping the next chapter of life with a purpose, clarity, and joy. If you find value in stories like this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future important conversations about living fully at every stage of life. All right, let's set the stakes. I'm 63 now, nearly the same age my dad was. And when a doctor tells you you only have 6 months to live, it doesn't feel abstract. It isn't just a number, it's like a countdown. Each day carries a weight that you can't ignore. For our family, it was shocking, disorienting, and very painful. But here's what nobody tells you about having a terminal diagnosis. It's also very clarifying. It forces you to strip away everything trivial and focus only on what matters. That's exactly what happened to my dad and also what I experienced. Now the good news, when my father was given 6 months to live, he actually ended up living for more than 6 years. As tragic as it was knowing his time was limited, it became a blessing in disguise. It gave us all, our entire family, the chance to say our proper goodbyes, but also have the conversations that truly matter about his wishes for his final days, but more importantly, his hopes for how myself and my sisters would live our lives. And here's another remarkable thing. During that time, I actually became his spiritual advisor in a way. I helped him face his own mortality. And he, in return, he gave me some of the best advice of my life. Live your own life, not the one others expect of you. Earlier in my life, he was a parent. He had questioned some of my choices, like traveling and living overseas and chasing adventures. But near the end, he admitted that those were the very things that made me the happiest and gave me meaning. And finally, he saw those choices not as mistakes, but as the foundation of the life I was meant to live. What struck me the most was how my dad changed when time became finite. It was like watching somebody wake up from being a stoic for 40 years. He stopped worrying about little things, the annoyances, the petty conflicts, the grudges we all carry. They just fell away, and he started focusing on connection. He wanted real conversations. He began expressing feelings he had buried for years or just kind of kept silent about. He made peace with people he'd been stubborn with, including me. And most importantly, he shifted from always planning for the future to being present in the moment that he was living. For me personally, it was both heartbreaking, but also really inspiring to witness. Heartbreaking, of course, because I wished he'd lived that kind of clarity his whole life, and I wish he was still around today. But it was also inspiring because I could see how powerful it was when somebody finally stripped life down to what really mattered. And then came the most beautiful, pleasant surprise. Those 6 months to live, well, they stretched into 6 years. Yes, we lived on borrowed time we weren't supposed to have. Every holiday, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday felt like a gift. And here's the remarkable thing. He never went back to his old ways. That 6-month deadline had permanently rewired him, and that was the lesson. The gift wasn't the disease. The gift was the deadline. Those 6 extra years weren't just more days on the calendar. They were richer, fuller, and more intentional years than ever before. Every day was bonus time. My dad lived them as if he knew that. And now I want to talk about our Buddhist philosophy connection. My father was from Thailand, so he was Thai, but he'd left his home country before practicing much of its traditional Buddhist philosophy. Ironically, in his final years, he began asking me about it, because by then, I'd actually studied in monasteries in Southeast Asia and learned Buddhist philosophy firsthand for myself. So there I was. I'm a young man, and it's near the end of my father's life, and I'm serving as his teacher. He wanted to know about death meditation, a practice where you imagine yourself and your loved ones getting sick, aged, and dying. Not because it's morbid, but because accepting the inevitable is actually very liberating. It pulls your attention away from trivial worries and forces you to focus on what matters while you still can. And I remember sitting with him, talking through these ideas, and seeing him lean in with curiosity. He wanted to understand. He wanted to make peace. And in those conversations, I realized something very profound. My dad, who'd spent much of his life skeptical of my choices, was now looking to me for guidance guidance and embracing the very wisdom that he once brushed aside. And I gotta tell you, it gave me a lot of confidence, but more importantly, it gave me the emotional freedom to pursue the life that I truly wanted. I became more certain of my own choices, and I began living more openly without carrying the burden of other people's expectations. At this point, I'd love to hear from you. If you knew your time was shorter than expected, what would you do differently right now? Would you travel more, reconnect with family, or finally pursue that project you've been putting off? Please drop your answer in the comments. Your perspective might help somebody else watching this video. So how does this apply to retirement and life? Here's the truth. You don't need a terminal diagnosis to live with this kind of clarity. Let's face reality. If you're over 50, you already have a countdown running. You just don't see the timer on the wall. And that raises the real questions. What would you stop doing if you knew your time was limited? What conversations would you finally have? What experiences would you prioritize? And how would you spend your last healthy decade? The difference between my dad and most people is pretty simple. He was forced to pay attention, but you don't have to wait for that wake-up call. You can choose it now. So how did this change my life? Well, for me, my father's lesson became the foundation of how I approach retirement, or what I like to call mini retirements. Instead of deferring joy, I began building it into my life right then and there. I stopped telling myself I would travel someday. I traveled while I could. I stopped stacking up work projects for a future that frankly wasn't guaranteed. I created balance in the presence. I started treating time like the non-renewable currency that it is. My father's final gift wasn't just about 6 extra years. It was perspective that has guided me into living a retirement that's not defined by an end, but rather by a beginning. I often think about how I wish my dad had lived with this clarity his entire life, not just at the end. And I wish that I'd learned this lesson at 40 and not 60, but I'm grateful that I learned it at all, because it's changed the way I live every single day now. And that's what I'm sharing this story for now. Because if you're in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, you still have time to make this shift. You still have time to focus on what matters, to stop deferring your joy, to live the life that you want, not the one that anybody else expects of you. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the UnRetired for more conversations about living fully after 50. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. What's one thing you would start doing today if you knew that your time was limited? Lastly, here's a question for you. If you had 6 months left, what would you do differently? And more importantly, what's stopping you from doing it right now? If you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks you'll also like these as well. Go ahead and check them out. They might be exactly what you need next.